Welcome, welcome. I think I'm live on all the platforms. I'm checking it, and it looks right. So hopefully, fingers crossed, it stays that way. It never, even in 2022, I still don't know what's going to happen or what's going to go down. So my name is Trisha Broderick. Hi there. I'm with Ignite Insight and Innovation. And today it's a different day than I normally do. I normally do the first Friday of each month, but I have an event tomorrow with Humanizing Work, and it's all day and I can't leave it. So we're making this a Thursday, February, changing it up a little bit off the bat. So welcome to today, first Thursday of the month. And normally it will be Fridays going forward still, pending anything else that comes up on Fridays. And today's topic is about glass cliffs. So most people have heard of glass ceiling. Glass ceilings are basically essentially the kind of the metaphor used to highlight this invisible barrier that a lot of underrepresented folks can experience, especially females, but it really can be any underrepresented intersectionality in terms of how high they can go within organizations or within companies. And I'm familiar with that. I honestly had never really thought about it a ton in a lot of ways as somebody who has been an executive and in different ways, but I only recently heard about the term glass cliff, and it's been around since like 2005, but I only heard about it a couple years ago, and I thought it was an interesting twist or dynamic that actually highlighted a lot of prior issues I've had or internal issues I've had with some things. So I thought, let's talk about it. Let's highlight it. So what a glass cliff is. So if a glass ceiling is kind of that invisible barrier, a glass cliff was coined by, and I want to get their names right, Michelle Ryan and Alexander Haslam back in 2005, after an article had been published that basically said females, especially females, that broke through the glass ceiling, they tended to fail. And what Michelle and Alexander did, was research women that were in these senior positions, what it was like as they led into it. And typically there have been months of just absolute bad performance, problems, things going on. And so how it was relayed to me when I learned about it during a conference called Women Who Roar, is that a glass cliff is basically a promotion for women, but really any underrepresented individual, that is basically kind of a setup in that we need somebody in this position, but we're not going to give them active support. It's a hot mess to begin with as you're out there. It's your chances of success are not only limited to start, they stay challenging because of the environment you're in, the situation, the support, the dynamics. Essentially, when you do get promoted, when you do break the ceiling, you don't have the same experience as maybe your male counterparts do. And it was a really fascinating, I can't believe I had never heard about it prior to this, but I had it. And the speaker who was highlighting it was really kind of talking about how it can be really isolating and struggling for women in senior leadership positions. And that I could relate to on many fronts. So I thought about doing this topic today, and Angeli actually posted a comment that I couldn't get back on for some reason onto my phone, but I could see it here in terms of being curious of whether or not we actively promote women just to be the fall person or the bad person in the scenario. And I honestly, maybe I'm naive, maybe I'm optimistic, I don't believe that is. I've never been in any conversation, I've never heard of any conversation where hey, we know this is going to fail, let's give it to a woman. I don't think that's the case in a lot of situations. Sure, I'm sure it can happen with those things. But what I wanted to talk about this specifically was a little bit of like, if you feel you are in this situation, you feel like you're on a glass cliff, what can you do to survive, to make the most, to maybe stop making it feel like a glass cliff a little bit, in those things. Clearly, what I'm going to say doesn't apply to every situation. I'm just going to highlight a few of the things that in hindsight maybe worked for me or didn't work for me or wish I had done in hindsight as it was. So first thing is is that kind of reminder, and this applies not just on a glass cliff by any means, but the experience is always more important than the results. I just actually had to randomly coach my daughter's volleyball team, club team, and everybody was so focused on the wins. All I could see was the growth and the difference that was happening. And none of us are perfect. None of us happen overnight. Learning takes time, and sometimes those really horrible situations, those really bad experiences, the bad results are some of the best growth and learning I experienced in my career. Not that I'm out advocating for you to fail, not that I want it to be miserable, right? But it is that moment where you kind of stop and say, I am still learning, even if it's what not to do. And sometimes that can be down to being worth it to see what happens when we leave people unsupported. What happens when we promote somebody during a time when it's just crazy, and then we like put all these pressures on their shoulders, and then expect them to be a magical unicorn that just changes everything overnight. And what happens from that? And sometimes me even being able to experience that environment has helped me avoid that, creating that environment for somebody else, even with the best of intentions. Maybe not avoid, maybe minimize at times, right? But experience is what you take with you. You don't get to take the product you created with you. You don't get to take the performance review with you to the next company or to the next situation, but you do take your experience. So prioritize that. Prioritize your learning that you're achieving. Second tip, find outside mentors. If people inside the company are not actively supporting you, not actively helping you grow and learn, go outside. That you may not be able to disclose every element that you're dealing with. Like there may be NDAs, there might be just general confidentiality you want to keep, but use coaches, use mentors outside of your organization to gut check yourself, to give yourself some confidence, to get some support as you're going with it. In hindsight, I used a lot of friends out that. I wish I had actually hired a coach earlier on in my career. I wish I had used more kind of formal mentors in a lot of ways to say, hey, I don't want to feel like I'm just putting you out. So I don't ask. So I didn't, reach out versus, no, I need assistance. I need help. I need support. And there's nothing wrong with that. And so don't be afraid to kind of reach out beyond the network that's being provided to you in your organization to actually see other potential options that are out there. 3, I know I started all of this with like, there's this glass cliff potentially and things like that. Don't go into every assumption though, that every promotion, even if it's crazy and chaotic and messy right now, is a glass cliff. I can honestly own that there were times that I was like, they want me to fail. They didn't want me to fail. But I was so nervous. I was insecure. I was frustrated. I didn't have all the skills I needed at that time. And maybe can you ever, right? But it was easy for me sometimes to go with the stereotype like, oh, women can't handle this, or I'm not good enough for this, or everybody expects me to fail. And the stories I could tell myself, they were impressive. They were very impressive. And some might have even been true. More of them were not. And so I think there's an element of not assuming every promotion is a glass cliff, not assuming, right? Like that people are expecting you to fail or they don't have confidence in you. We're not very great at telling people and supporting people in the workplace. So don't assume the lack of it is actually actively promoting negative results. It may just be bad leadership, bad team members. And I know I'm guilty of that at times too. And so I want to be careful as I'm also highlighting this because I found it really like, oh yeah, a lot of my times that I've stepped up, there's been chaos and can I make it through the chaos and doing those things. But there were also times that I was the right person for the job in that moment. And it wasn't a fall person that they were looking for, that it was genuinely the right person. They just might not have had all the skills I needed as a team member or as a fellow leader in those areas. So I'm using tip number 3 to caution you to not just assume that every scenario is one that is looking for you to fail. I don't think any glass ceiling situation wants people to fail personally. I think it happens to where it's a byproduct of the system, of the environment, of biases and things like that. But again, maybe I just want to believe in people. I just really do, that very few are actually going, oh, let's promote this person because if they fail, we don't care. Because they're usually invested in the failure too. Like they've got some dynamic that is involved with that as well. So maybe my naive, optimistic hope for 2022, I don't know, this world in general, but it was something that I had to realize that there were times that I almost walked into conversations going, they want me to fail. And it was a lot of wasted energy. If I had just focused back on my tip number 1 and tip number 2, I would have been spending my time a lot better than the stories I was telling myself in my head a little bit. Because sometimes I can validate those stories, sometimes they're not. Tip number 4, don't put it all on your shoulders. If it is a situation that you do feel like it's impossible, it feels like a cliff, it feels like the edge is right there, lead, but don't put it all on yourself. Create a team, create partners, work with others, challenge yourself, challenge others. But in the same way, the best leaders are not hubs. The best leaders are not people that are the hero that comes in at the 11th hour and takes over and does everything themselves. Your success as a leader is rarely solely on just your shoulders. It's what kind of team can you create? What kind of environment do you create? And so my first job, when I'm in a situation where I feel like, oh my gosh, the ground could give out at any minute. There's just glass cliff that's right there. I'm just trying to get a little bit of stabilization, some safety in that dynamic of going, who's in it with me? Who's working with me? Who wants to be here and engaged? And how do we make this feel not so scary? How do we make it feel so that people can build a little bit more psychological safety to focus on what we need to focus on, to deliver, to get things done? And what does that mean? And not trying to do it all in one shot, not trying to fix everything overnight. That's crazy. Your team can't deliver overnight. You can't deliver overnight either. It takes time to build that space, that environment, that team, and to allow for that to happen, to look for what's a safety, a hook that you can hook onto yourself that keeps you grounded. If that's an outside mentor, if that's increasing your transparency with it, highlighting the challenges that are coming in, being transparent about what your first goal is, even though you know that these other bigger problems exist further on. What are those mini baby steps you can take? You don't want to do jumping jacks out on that cliff, right? You don't want to jump as hard as you can. What are some baby steps that you can take that make it more sound, make it feel more secure, and do that, right? The more that you try to put yourself into this, like, no, I got to fix everything overnight, the more that glass cliff feels unstable. And then my last point that I'm going to leave you with is, regardless if it really is a glass cliff or not, regardless if you really have support or you don't, regardless of whether or not you're trying to just focus on learning over results, there is still a reason and still a value that puts you in this current position. You have strengths. Every single person has strengths. Don't forget to leverage them. Don't forget to use them. Don't forget to build on them. Don't shy away from them. I'm a loud, extroverted, emotionally empathetic individual. And in those moments of chaos, that's not the time for me to suddenly be the quietest person I've ever been in my entire life, or the lack of any kind of feeling in the workplace. No, I embrace who I am. That is partially what helped me to get where I am today. Do I still want to learn and grow and build other skills? Absolutely. That's what the experience being in that environment can do, where you're still gaining benefits no matter what the situation is. But don't forget that you worked hard to get here. And so if you start telling yourself those stories, you might also tell yourself the stories about the successes you've had, the growth that you've had. Because sometimes we think we're on a cliff, we think we're at the edge. And then when we remember our strengths, we realize we're good. We've got further that we can take and go with this. So those are my tips. Those are the things in some cases that I've done. In some cases I wish I had done earlier in my career, or at least try and do now. You don't get to decide if you're on a glass cliff in some ways. If that situation really does happen and it truly is the core glass cliff of somebody's promoting you and with the intention that if you fail, you're an easy target to fail. I think that's the most negative version of glass cliff that I can think of. I try to think of the positive that maybe they are promoting you in a situation and you're not going to be in an environment with a lot of support. But if you do these 5 things, you're still going to gain value. You're going to still support yourself, believe in yourself, gain that experience, and set a model for what's possible going forward. So I love to hear your stories as you're going forward with this. I'm continuing to learn more about it myself. Again, it's been around forever and I'm only learning about it now, which is very sad for me, but better late than never, right? As we're going forward with it. So I don't have a lot of public things coming up. I have an advanced facilitation ACSM this month with the Agile for Humanity conference on February 22nd and 23rd. And then I have our next Leading Amazing Teams course with Jake Calabrese in March. Both of those can be signed up for if you would like. If you have questions, though, let me know. And feel free to put in the comments, what's your experiences with surviving the glass ceiling or the glass cliff? I'd love to hear your tips. I want to learn too as we're going along with this. So thank you. And until next month.